Hi, welcome back. This lecture, or this talk, actually, it's more of a talk than a lecture, is the introduction to part one of the course. I believe, as I tried to explain, we'll be recording lectures or talks introducing each part of the course. If you are listening to this, that should mean that you've already watched the welcome video and have done the preparatory reading in terms of getting started and have read through the introduction to the course document and the syllabus, which are the real keys to the course, how it's structured, how it's set up. But this then is the first section of the course, part one of the course, and to help you frame it in context of the course as a whole, and also further help, let's say, getting going with the course, what to do about it. I hope you all have acquired a copy of the textbook because that is essential. The lectures are posted lectures. The syllabus states, in terms of the reading for the course, part one, you need to have read books 1 and 2 of the textbook and read the assigned lectures. And then there'll be a quiz at the end. Now, something about the relationship between the textbook and the lectures, which I did address in the introduction to the course document, but I need to do so, or I feel it would be beneficial to do so a bit more. The lectures, especially for part one of this course, do not correspond as such with the textbook. As explained in the introduction of the course, I feel it's part of my responsibility as a professor to offer you what I uniquely can, and that my job is not to help you read the textbook. That you should be able to do on your own. And one of the areas that I focus on in my own work is, let's say, the philosophy of history. And that is really important, too, for our understanding of what this course is all about and what history is all about. Because we talk about history courses and the history of the world, and this is the perspectives on world history to approximately 1800. What does that really mean? I mean, what is the context or content of this course? And if we don't know really what history is, how do we go about knowing what we're doing here? Now, there's a distinction I make that I think is essential, and is essential for this entire course, and is the basis, in some ways, of your final exam. Now, I believe I said that both in the introduction to the course and in the welcoming video that the final exam is really a semester-long project. So one of the first things I would do, if you haven't done so already, is read through the final exam question. And at this point of the course, it probably will be overwhelming. And it is an overwhelming question, but I'll be talking more about that later. Not in this lecture, but just go through it and say, okay, what is it asking? So this is the end of the course, the final exam, the final essay. How can that help me approach the beginning of the course? And in the textbook begins really with the origins of human cultures and civilizations, evolution, the very earliest civilizations. And that really gets at what does it mean to be human. Now, the distinction I make in the course is between the history of the world and then world history. You say, well, what's the difference? Well, there is, in some ways, a huge difference. The history of the world is the history of everything that has ever happened, from the very beginnings of this planet Earth and how it came into being and how it has developed, and then the emergence of life on the planet, and then the emergence of hominids, the evolutionary development of humans, and just hominids are humans, whereby our species is Homo sapiens, but there have been hominid species, human species, before our current species. And how are we to understand this, let's say, biological evolutionary development when things such as human culture and that which we call civilization arises? Civilization is a very distinctive form of human culture. There was human culture long before there was civilization. What makes for civilization, and therefore for world civilization? It's only at that point when we begin to discuss world civilization, with the emergence of civilization in the Middle East, approximately 4000 BCE, that we can begin to talk about world history. Because world history is the history of the world as a whole. That's kind of this distinction. Whereas the history of the world is everything that has ever happened. World history, as I am using the term here, is more precise. It is there something that is a distinctive connection whereby there emerged a global context? Because the global context, which we still are dealing with today, is really when we see the beginnings of world history. Now, I think I addressed this in the opening, but if I didn't, I probably should have, or introduction to the course document. And that is why world history, not just Western civilization, because the other course that I teach and is often taught is Western civilization. And traditionally, that was the course that was taught at universities and required as a general education requirement was the history of Western civilization. Probably in the later 60s or 70s, world history courses started to develop. The idea was that Western civilization courses were very Eurocentric, Euro-American-centric. And they were, and they are. And therefore, it was like, okay, to be more inclusive, we need to get rid of Western Civ and focus on world civilization, world history. And at some universities, they then got rid of their Western civilization courses and then just began to teach world history. At IU Indianapolis, and before IU Indianapolis was IU Indianapolis, at IUPUI, as it was formulated from the beginning, we've always had both Western civilization and world history. I think both are important. They're different perspectives, different focuses with each. But when we look at Western civilization, the question we should ask is, can we really understand Western civilization if we do not place it within the world context? And in my Western civilization courses, I try to do this too, to say, okay, for a lot of its development, Europe was internal, was looked within. It's kind of an own development as an island, but that's another issue. But then beginning in the 11th century, began to look outward, and there began to be these connections between Europe and the rest of the world. Now, your textbook, too, is Eurocentric. You should be aware of that. And I talk about this sometimes in the lectures when Roberts refers to the age of Europe, the European age, and the time of European hegemony in the world. That's from a European perspective. Now, that does not mean we can just dismiss it if we say, okay, well, that's a bias. It is, but we're all biased. Bias is just our point of observation, as I think I address in some of the lectures. But what do we do about it? There is no objective point of observation. Everyone is biased. The issue is to be aware of that and account for it. And that's what I try to do here. In the lectures for this first part of the course, whereas Roberts in the textbook is dealing with the emergence of human cultures and civilizations and the evolutionary development, I'm focusing on the question of what is doing history to begin with. Because we think of history simply as what happened or the past. But really, when it comes down to it, the past does not exist. We only have the present. What we have in the present are artifacts, evidence that signify what happened. That makes it difficult. We can't assume that the story that historians have told is the reality. Historians interpret. We analyze evidence, interpret it, give meaning to it, and try to come up with an account or a story of what happened. That is the term emplotment, which you will see also in the final exam, is how you put it all together, so to speak. How do you put it all together? And part of that is what it is that we are doing in the first place. So the lectures, the written lectures for part one, focus on the doing of history and how the doing of history and the different views of it affect our understanding of, let's say, then what happened. Often the philosophy of history is treated as a separate subdiscipline of history, primarily by philosophers and not historians. As an historian, I try to engage in the philosophy of history. In other words, like theory that people use, and people have different theories for historical development and different schools of thought. So it is an issue of how do we relate what historians do to what, quote unquote, actually happened in the actual development. I think it's very difficult because we cannot observe what happened. We can only observe the evidence that still exists that signifies what happened. And we have to question it. We have to question it. How do we go about doing so? How do we go about reconstructing what we feel based on our analyses? The extant sources and evidence signify about what happened. Now, I've been working with the philosophy of history and a fair amount. I teach regularly, not all the time, but regularly, History H217, which is called The Nature of History, as well as the senior seminar. And I'm not an ancient historian. I make no questions about it. I'm not a world historian. My area of expertise is late medieval Europe, late medieval, early modern Europe. I can't get away from that. And so I don't think it makes a great deal of sense for me to try to pretend that I'm an expert on the earliest origins and development of civilization. Now, I teach that in my Western Civilization course. I do. And some of that we'll bring in here as well. But the whole point is how to relate what the textbook is saying with, let's say, the theoretical or the philosophical issues presented in the lectures. And that, too, comes back on the final exam. When you look at the question and analyze it, it is asking the questions of, is there anything within human nature, so to speak, that is a commonality? If so, what is it? And how do we account for all the vast differences of the different cultures that we'll be looking at, especially with the ancient cultures as well, from the very beginning in China, in India, in Mesoamerica, which it comes about a little bit later. But how do we understand this diversity? And is there, though, a unity that makes us all human? That's kind of the question that we're getting at in this course. And how do we grasp it and deal with it? How do we understand our vast diversity based on our commonality? Now, I'm not arguing for any given position. And if you want to say and make a case and argue that humans are not all the same, except we're part of the same species, but the diversity indicates that there is not really a commonality, you can argue that. The question is, how well do you argue with that, and on what basis? You have to have evidence for it. And the evidence for this course is the lectures and the textbook, and then basic logic. So if you are simply putting forth your opinion, that's not going to cut it. And I'm not going to grade opinions. I think I addressed that too in the introduction to the course. I'm not going to grade opinions. I can grade, and I will be grading, positions and arguments based on the evidence. How well you bring the course material to bear on the problem given you, which is the problem that you will be meeting in your exams, the 4 exams, and then in the final exam. And the 4 exams, as I think I said already in the introduction to the course, are intended to help prepare for the final exam. That's the big issue. Now, in Module 4, you will see in the last item in Module 4 is the quiz number 1. The quiz, as I explained, is multiple choice. It is therefore, quote unquote, objective. It is testing your, quote unquote, information and how well you know the information. It's an online quiz, but it's also a timed quiz. So you won't have the time to sit and look up the answers to every question. So we need to study. Now, the quiz is drawn from the terms on the quiz, is drawn from the list of terms to know for exam one. Exam one, excuse me, that's my dog coming in here. Sorry about that. Exam one is at the end of Module 4 as well. Actually, I'm just going to check on this to make sure I don't have it wrong, because we have the quiz at the end of week 4, and then exam one is a separate module. So that is how that all works. So you take the quiz, and then that should help prepare you for the exam, to give you a sense of have I learned the material sufficiently that I can really begin to write exam one. You are able to take the quiz twice. Your first attempt, and the correct answers will be shown you, and then you can take it one more time. But both times are timed 10-minute quizzes, which still is like a minute per question, which is, the issue is whether either you know it or you don't. But you need to study the entire list of terms to know. Now, that's intended to help. Okay. And the whole focus then is to help with the exam, which is then intended to help with preparing for the final essay. That is the core of what I wanted to say in terms of this first part of the exam. In part 2, as I will address further in the introduction to part 2 lecture, there begins to be more of a coordination and parallelism beginning to be between the lectures and the textbook. But for now, in some ways, the textbook is one thing, the lectures are another, and your task is to put them together. Meaning, how does the philosophical issues of doing history, of what history is, of how historians go about writing history, on what basis, how does that affect the story that's told, the narrative, the whole lecture on the narrative that is being told in terms of the history or the perspectives of world history, beginning with the earliest development. So, if you have any questions about any of this, please do ask. This is the perfect opportunity to reach out, send me an email, and say, I really don't understand what you're getting at. Can we talk more about it, more specifically about it? And I'll say, of course, again, email me, esaak@iu.edu. And we can just talk over Zoom. We can talk over email, so to speak, but Zoom somehow, I think, is a better means for really getting at understanding. Email can be very good for some questions, for practical questions. That's not a problem. But when we get into the real nitty gritty, so to speak, in terms of like, what do you mean by, the past doesn't exist? That I think can work better with Zoom. But anyway, it's up to you. This is your course, and again, I'm here to help. So use me, reach out, ask questions, do the reading, and think about it. Think about it. What is history? And in some ways, it's like, what is memory? Who are you? Who am I as a person? And what is that based on? Is it based on simply my memory? Is it based on who I want to be? Is it based on who I want to make myself out to be? Are there things about my past that I don't remember that are really important? Are there things about my past that I do remember but don't want to remember because they don't fit in with how I want to think of myself right now? In so many ways, history is simply memory writ large. It's social memory. Who are we? How did we get here? What does it all mean? Those are the questions we're dealing with. So make it personal. Make it personal in terms of how the material of this course, from the philosophy of history lecture, so to speak, in this first part of the course, and the discussions in Roberts of the origins of civilization, how do they come together? Now, I should say one more thing about the textbook. The textbook is not, quote unquote, truth any more than the lectures are, quote unquote, truth, the written lectures. They are perspectives. Also, Roberts is an excellent textbook. I already mentioned it's Eurocentric, and it is, but it's still an excellent textbook. But it's not the end-all and be-all, especially with early development and evolutionary development. We are constantly finding new things. There's been recent discoveries indicating that human Homo sapiens were in North America far earlier than previously thought. So it's not the latest information, but it's the basis for your grade. Now, what does that mean? It means you need to learn it, and the basis of your grade is how well you learn it and apply it. Does that mean you can't bring in superior knowledge? No, you can. If you have it, the sources must be cited. If you make statements of Roberts was wrong, here's how so. You need to state it and cite your sources. That is essential because it's all based on evidence. Again, it's not opinion. So that is the issue. History, like cosmology, astrophysics, etc., is always changing, is always developing because we are always discovering new things, which forces us to reevaluate the emplotment that we have inherited. Question. That's it. Question yourselves. Question what you've been taught. Question the stories you've been told, and seek to find a deeper understanding of yourself and the world in which we find ourselves and how we have come to this position in life. What does it all mean? And what then are the constants? The constants. What are the commonalities of human beings, of being human? And how do those relate to the diversities that we find? That's what this is all about. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. I hope you will enjoy this and accept it as a challenge. And I'm here to help the best I can. Thank you so much, and good luck with it all. Bye-bye.